Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the March 30th, 2018 edition of the Intuit Developer Friday Morning Hangout. I'm your host, David Leary. Today we have a special guest. Diana DeRose is coming on. She's going to teach us all about using Postman, from using Postman at a generic high-level sense with other platforms, using Postman to help people troubleshoot Oauth, and then using Postman actually with our own QuickBooks Online APIs. So without further ado, Diana, I think you're on mute still if you want to unmute and say hi to everybody.
Hey everyone, I'm Diana DeRose. I'm a developer relations engineer with the Intuit Developer Group. I work mostly with third-party developers to help them with their QuickBooks Online integration and help them build apps in our platform and publish them in our app store. In addition to that, I also manage the SDKs and build samples and tools for our developer community to use. And today I'll be talking about one such tool called Postman. Before we begin, I think, David, you probably have a few other slides to go through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So while you're getting prepared to present here, I just have some housekeeping slides to go through. As a reminder, we again this year are doing the $100,000 Small Business App Showdown. What this is, we take all the apps that published between August 16th of last year and August 15th of this year. And there's a public voting phase. We get connections, we get reviews, and we take the top 10 finalists to Quickbooks Connect in San Jose. They pitch in front of a panel of judges, and the winner takes home $100,000. But it's not just about winning that contest. It's really the exposure of just being a finalist, right? This year we took the finalists to Startup Grind Weekend. So we've taken the finalists on tour and getting them out there in front of all the QuickBooks users and the accountants as well. So just remember, you have 138 days to meet the deadline to publish your app to getonapps.com. You want to shoot for really mid-July at the latest because it takes us time. You have to pass the tech review, you have to pass the security review, you have to pass a marketing, pass a legal review, and these things take time. And there's 500 apps on apps.com, and I think Diana and I were speaking earlier today. I think one or two made it through the tech review perfectly with no mistakes. So it's just build in buffer time. Like if you submit on August 14th, we are not going to get you live on apps.com by August 15th. So really you should start thinking about pushing 4 to 6 weeks out ahead of this deadline. And then obviously because of that, I want to tell you about QuickBooks Connect. So QuickBooks Connect is coming up at November 5th through the 7th. You want to mark this on your calendars. We'll have about 27 to 3,000 accountants there, 2,700 to 3,000 accountants there. Anywhere between 500 to 800 developers because of all the sponsors and developers that just come to attend. We'll have developer content. And then the rest of it's all small business owners. So you're pushing 5,000 to 6,000 people all in one building, all about QuickBooks Online, all about the QuickBooks ecosystem and everybody really connecting and meeting each other. So mark this on your calendars if you haven't already so you can attend QuickBooks Connect. And then this Hangout and all the other events that we do on the developer team, you can find on the events page. And that's just developer.intuit.com/hub/events. Just a couple to call out. We have our upcoming hackathon in Sydney. So those of you who are in the Australian region of the world, AU region, definitely check out. Think about attending the Small Business Hackathon in Sydney. Think about attending QuickBooks Connect in Sydney as well. And we will have a special set of pre-hackathon hangouts dealing for all the small business partners that are going to be on board. So if you want to learn about some new APIs, definitely check that out as well. And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing here and then let Diana get in. Whoops, that's my video. I'm going to hit stop sharing. There you go.
Okay. So so today I'll be talking about Postman. It's a very cool tool. I use it almost every day in my day-to-day activities. Oftentimes when I work with developers, they have trouble, they have errors or trouble. They want to troubleshoot a specific use case or a scenario. And in a world without Postman or some other REST client tool, what I would have to do is write in some code and then pass their request and try to mimic their exact failure and then modify the request and find out what's going on and then share it back. But with Postman, it makes it easy for me to just use their request directly and try out their sample or their exact JSON and modify it and share it with them. So it's a pretty cool tool. And today I'll be showing you some of the capabilities. And once you know how to use it, I think it can come pretty handy. So with that, let me go share my screen. David, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. So just to clarify, Dan, Postman is not our tool. Like we don't build it into it. It's not a QuickBooks specific tool. It's really a developer tool, but
Right.
there's now so many APIs and other platforms using it that you as a developer, it's very efficient for you to learn the tool once and use it across many platforms you might be developing on.
Right, right. So yeah, I'll quickly give an introduction of what Postman is. So
I jumped the gun on you.
let me share my screen and then
Okay,
we'll go from there. Okay. 1 second.
And as a reminder, while Diana is sharing her screen, if you have any general discussions, please feel free to use the chat panel. If you have any specific questions about today's topic or questions for Diana, please use the Q&A panel. Thank you.
Okay, so let me these tools. So this is just a quick overview of the agenda that I'll be presenting. I'll give you a quick Postman overview, and then we'll take a sample API call. This is not QuickBooks, just a very generic call, and we'll get started to see how Postman helps us make an API call really quickly and easily. Then I'll dig in deeper into the OAuth capabilities that Postman provides. As most of you who work with REST API probably know that Auth is one of those pieces that makes it a little painful, making REST API a little painful for us. So we'll see how Auth makes it easy for us to generate the Auth tokens as well as generate the actual authorization header for the REST API call. And then I'll be going over some of the variables that Postman offers, environment variables, global variables, dynamic variables, and how you can use that for your testing and development phase. And then there's a code generation feature that Postman offers. And then I'll also demo an Apple Watch app that I built using completely or using the Postman's code generation feature. And then finally, I will show some of the QuickBooks Online Postman collections that we offer, which can help you understand our APIs and get started with our platform easily. So with that said, let me go to my browser. Okay, so the very first thing, this is Postman, as David asked earlier, it's not something Intuit developed. It is it's a separate organization altogether. It's owned by a Postman team, and you can access or read about them by going to getpostman.com. And as you can scroll here, and you'll see that it's not a very new tool. It's been here for a while, and we have several million developers and a large number of companies that use this tool on a day-to-day basis for their development and testing purposes. And if you scroll here, you can probably read about all the capabilities that Postman provides. So starting from designing your APIs to testing, debugging, and even documenting and publishing the APIs, they have capabilities for each of them. In today's session, I will focus more on the debugging and testing aspect of it, but feel free to explore the other areas as well to see if any of these are helpful to you. With that said, the very first thing, if you don't already have Postman, the very first thing that you need to do is go up here and click on and download the app button. And once you do that, you can select the platform of your choice and download the app. It's a completely free app. They might have some premier features available for which you need to pay, but otherwise it's completely free for the basic. For all the items that I'm covering in the agenda today, you can do it in the free basic version. And then once you download the app, this is how it looks like. Let me go here. I already have some requests here, but let's ignore that for now. So when you open up Postman newly, this is how it looks like. And you can see here, you can directly select, what kind of HTTP request you want to make. You can select get or post, and then you can start typing the API URL here and click send, and you'll be able to make the API call.
Diana, could you do a control zoom just one time, just to make it a little bit bigger? Or control plus. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That works. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so for the purpose of the demo, I have already created a collection here. So that's one other thing that I love about Postman is that you can create or you can play around with set of APIs, and then you can, as you try out, you can save the request, and if you're super organized, you can put them in a collection here or organize them into folders, and you can share them once you build this collection, and you can share it with your team members, you can share it with your friends or anybody else who you think it will be useful for. So this is one of the collection that I just built for the demo today. So in order to get started, let's just use a very simple Maps API. So this is Google's Maps API, and all I'm doing here is, actually, this is not the right API. Let me get the other one. Okay. Actually, let's just take the GitHub API. I lost my Maps API. Okay. So params. Yeah. So we'll use the GitHub API instead, since I lost the URL for the Maps API. So what this is doing is it's just basic. I'm using the GitHub's API to query all the repositories that are available within Intuit Developer. This API doesn't require any auth headers, although if you don't use the auth headers, you will be subject to their rate limiting. You can only call the API a few times within the hour. So since this is just a demo, I will show you how to make a simple call. You can just, once you type the URL, you can hit send. And then you can see here that there was a successful response back. There's a status code here, how much time it took, what's the payload size. And then in the body here, you can see the basic response that came back as part of the API. And then you can also, if you click on the headers tab, you can go here and check what are the different headers that got returned back as part of the API response. So in this case, GitHub has, like I was mentioning, a rate limit for certain APIs. So it's telling me, okay, I can only call it a few more times within the next hour. So what this does is basically you can try out the APIs without actually writing your code. It helps you make judgment on how you can handle your response, what are the headers that you may need to capture, and all of this you can do it without actually trying to write a code. You can play around with it, modify your request, see how it behaves, and then you can go and take all of this data and write your code. So that was a very simple API call that I just demoed. Now let's check how a post request would look like. And for demonstrating the post request, I am using our QuickBooks API. It's the simple query API that we have available to query our entities. So here what I'm doing is I have my Sandbox QuickBooks API URL for a company that that is available in my Sandbox. So all I'm doing here is putting the query API for our QuickBooks Online. And with post, you also need to send some body here. So in this case, in my body, I'm just querying a company info. So I've just selected here, or I've just typed here, select star from company info. And then in the headers tab, you can put the content type, accept parameters, or any other parameters that needs to go into your headers. And then for those of you who are familiar with QuickBooks, you do know that we support both Oauth 1 and Oauth 2. The query won't work without any authorization. So how does Postman help that? Well, if you go to the authorization tab here, you can select the type of authorization that you would like to use. So I'm going to demo Oauth 1 first, and then I'll also demo Oauth 2. For Oauth 1, you can select Oauth 1, and in this case, I already have my consumer key and access token and secret, and I've copied that and added it here. And for those of you who are familiar with Oauth 1, you probably know that this is not enough. You also need to generate something called as the Oauth Signature. And for those of you who've worked with it, you also know that it's not super easy to generate the signature. You most likely will end up using a library of some sort to generate that signature. So so with Postman though, you don't have to worry about getting a hold of a library or anything. It will automatically do that for you. So once I've added the consumer key, secret, access token, and access to secret, I can leave these fields empty, and it will update it with the value once I click update request. One other thing are the parameters here. Some APIs require your headers, auth headers, to be part of the URL. Some of them require it to be part of the header. QuickBooks API requires it to be part of the header. So I'm going to check the add params to header checkbox here. And now all of my settings are ready, and I'll just click update request. What did this do? You will see that the number here has increased from 3 to 4. So if I go to headers tab, you will see that my authorization header has been generated using the information that I provided in the authorization tab. And most of the information that I provided is automatically added here. But the new thing that got generated here is the Oauth signature, which is basically derived based on the values that I provided there and the URL that I'm trying to hit. So once we have all of this, the next thing that we can do is just hit send. And you can see here status successful, and we got the company info response back. So that was a very simple post call. But then if I'm trying this out every day on a day-to-day basis, it can become tedious for me to keep copying these tokens for every single request. So how do I get, how do I solve for that problem? Well, that's where Postman's environment variables comes into picture. So what that would do is basically any parts of your API or REST requests that are constant or that doesn't change across requests, you can put that as environment variables in Postman, and that can be used across your Postman instance and can be shared across your Postman instance for your other REST request. And I'll show you how to do that. So if you look at the top here, there's something called no environment. So in order to set your environment variable, you can go over here, click on the gear icon, and click on manage environments. And once you do that, you can build an environment, create a new environment variable here. You can give it a name. For example, I can say demo, and it's just key value pair. So I can create like a base URL or something, and the value for my QuickBooks API. So I can put like sandbox-quickbooks.api.intuit.com. So with that, what it means is I have set an environment variable with the value base URL and with the key as base URL and with the value as sandbox-quickbooks. So if you look at here, I've already created another environment here using all the data that I need for my REST API. So I've added the access token, the access secret, consumer key, consumer secret, the base URL, company ID, minor version. So everything that remains same across my other QuickBooks request, I've created a base environment. I also labeled it saying it's for my sandbox environment for this specific company. So once I've created the environment, what I can do next is select the environment from up here. So it gets listed over here. I'm going to select environment here. And then in my request, what I can do is I can replace the full URL using the parameters that I just created. So my base URL is now shortened now to use the variable names here, and my company ID, minor version. We go to the authorization tab, you'll also see that all of my authorization keys and tokens have been replaced with the variable names here. So what this would do is when I execute the request, it will look for these values from the environment variable that is selected here. So if you have multiple environment variables, it will only look from the variable that is selected here. If I don't have anything selected, then you might have noticed that the colors have changed to red, which means it's not able to resolve it. So make sure if you're using variables to select the right environment variable, and then it will be able to resolve this. And once I hit send, or once I update request, you'll see that it was able to get build the header from using the variable now. And then let me hit send, and you can see that the request was successful. So this is how you can use the environment variable. And one thing that it helps me is when I have to test in different types of environments. So this is my demo workspace. I also have a my other instance, Postman instance, that I use everyday life, and you can see here how many environment variables I have. So I can, I have several different E2E environments, prod environments, QA, Sandbox for different locales. So it really is helpful if you have, on a day-to-day basis, if you have to switch between environments, but your request remains the same, but your tokens, keys, or environments, switching between environments becomes really easy using the environment variable property. So the next thing that I want to show you is OAuth 2. So as you all know, Intuit also, QuickBooks APIs also support OAuth 2. And with OAuth 2, of course, the authorization header is not a big deal. It is much simpler than the OAuth 1 world. But how does Postman help with OAuth 2 is you not only are able to pass the authorization header, you can also generate the tokens using Postman tool. So here for this, for the same request here, I have a, I'm just checking if it's the same request. Okay, for the same request here, I have, I've selected authorization as OAuth 2. And once you do that, you see a button here called Get New Access Token. And once I click on that, you will see a page here that will, that has variables that you need to add into. So the first thing that you need to do is copy this callback URL that Postman has and add it to the QuickBooks for your app that you're trying to connect to. So here I have my app, and I think I've already added it, but let me just double check. So for those of you who are not familiar with OAuth 2, one of the requirements for OAuth 2 is that you will need to specify a redirect URI. And once you initiate the initial OAuth handshake, you get a response sent or callback sent back from the Intuit's OAuth API back to your redirect URI, and then with a temporary auth code, and then your redirect URI or your callback endpoint is supposed to process that auth code and then exchange that auth to get the actual access token. So if you're using Postman, basically what it means is that it requires you to host a callback URL in your end before you even start writing any call. So if you're not up for that, if you don't want to host a endpoint, you want to just try out the APIs, this is a good tool because you don't have to actually create any endpoint on your end. You can use Postman, and you can here in the redirect URI section, you can just add the Postman's callback URL in the redirect URI section. So once you do that, let me go back to my Postman. Oh, okay. So these are the auth URL for QuickBooks API. You can get this from our discovery document or from our regular documents as well. This is the authorization URL. This is the URL to get the access token. And then I've already filled in the client ID secret. I've added the scope as the accounting scope. And then the grant type as authorization code. I am on a little older version of Postman. So if you've upgraded or if you've just downloaded Postman, you might notice that the screen is slightly different than what you're seeing here, but most of the fields should be exactly the same. So once you fill in all these details, you can click on request token, and then it will ask you to log in. So I'm gonna log in here. Oops. Okay. And then I'm gonna select my US Sandbox, connect. And then once you've completed the whole OAuth flow, you'll see like a new token is generated, and you can see the whole response here. You have the refresh token, the access token, the other parameters that got returned as part of the API call. And again, you have the option of adding the token either to the header or the URL. And since QuickBooks requires the token to be part of the header, I'll select header here, and then I'll click use token. And once I do that, I should be able to make the call. I'm not quite sure if the company ID is right, but we'll find out. So looks like it was right. Okay. So this is how simple it was. You were able to generate token and then use that in the header to make an API call using Postman. So this is how you can do if you're not up for before you even start writing code, you can use Postman just by adding their callback URL. Again, OAuth tokens are short-lived, so you might have to re-auth it again or generate tokens again. And you can also generate multiple tokens and just make sure the name you give here is different for each, so you don't get confused, and you can keep generating new tokens and use it for making the API call. So that was OAuth 2. The next thing that I want to cover is variables so if you're familiar with QuickBooks API, or QuickBooks in general, you might know that QuickBooks requires each customer to have a unique display name. So what does that mean? They can have same names, but the display name field always needs to be unique. So when you're running tests, or if you built an integration and you're running tests on a daily basis just to make sure that your app integration works fine, so you might basically create like a test suite or some sort. But how do you make sure you can't hard code a name in there? Because the first day it'll work fine, the next time you run it, you'll run into duplicate name error, right? So if you're doing it programmatically, what you would do is you will use like a random generator string or something and then append it to the display name. So that way every time, or if you keep running the same API call multiple times, you'll not run into errors. So how can you achieve the same using Postman? This is where their random generator numbers comes into picture, or variable comes into picture. Let me quickly check what they call. It's called dynamic variables. Okay, so this is let me move back and forth. Okay. So these variables are called as dynamic variables. What that means is the value for these are dynamically generated. And they have variables for timestamp. They also have variables for random integers and for GUID. So for this demo, I'll be using GUID. So what I'm doing here is I'm using I'm calling customer API for QuickBooks, and if you're familiar with the customer API, you probably know that the only mandatory field for this API is the display name, which needs to be unique. So my request is pretty simple, just has a display name field. And in order to make the name unique, I have added the dynamic variable here called $GUID. And then the rest of my request is pretty much the same. I have the base URL, and then the path is different. Instead of query, this time I'm using customer. And in my header, I'll choose Oauth 1 as my authorization. And then since I've already selected the environment variable, it will resolve all the values correctly. So now once I run this, okay. So we see here the API call was successful. And if I, let me scroll it a little bit more, you'll see that the display name that got generated because of appending the dynamic variable is customer named hyphen the random generated string. So what this would mean is every time you rerun this test, you will not run into a duplicate name error. You can continue to run this variable here. So it can be useful when you have tests, when you have to run test suites periodically using the same data. The next thing that I want to show you is, so sometimes you also run into situations where you are, where a response of one API is needed as part of a request for your next API. For instance, if you're creating an invoice, you also need a customer and an item, right? So if you're writing a test suite for invoice, you probably need to create a customer first, and then you create invoice for that customer. So a lot of your for your invoice request, you need data from the customer API first. So in code, how you would do is you would issue the customer create API first, and then parse the response, save it, and then use that in your next call. So how would you achieve that in Postman? So that is where the global variables comes into picture. So what you can see here is I have a customer create request created here. I'm using the dynamic variable to generate a unique customer name. The next thing that I can do here is there's something called a test tab. And once I click on it, you'll see I've written some script here, and it's not very overwhelming script. It is pretty easy to read script. And what I'm doing here is if my test is successful, if the response code is 200, I'm just parsing the response body and retrieving the customer ID and customer name, capturing it in a variable. And then what I'm doing here is I'm calling Postman instance and setting a global variable with name, customer ID, and customer name. So what this basically does is when my this request runs, and if it's successful, it will, from the response JSON, it will capture the ID and name and store as global variable. So what is global variable? Where do you see it, right? So global variable is basically a variable that is available in global scope for any of your other requests to use. And then once you execute this, if you click on this eye icon here, you will see there's something called globals here, and my variable, the two variables that I set in my request are being saved here. So if you go back and look at the response, you'll see that the ID was 988 and display name was this. It matches the value that got saved in the global variable key value pair. So now that I have saved my global variables, how can I use it for in my invoice request? Let's see that. So for my invoice request, if you're familiar with QuickBooks API, you probably know that it needs a customer reference and a line item. So in my customer reference, instead of hard coding the ID, I am now using a variable name called customer ID, and this ID matches, or this name matches the name that is written, that is specified here. So what this means is when I run this request, it will look for this ID, and if it finds it, it will replace it and then execute the request. So everything else is just the same as the previous APIs that I showed. The base URL, the only difference is this time I'm creating an invoice, so I've specified the path as invoice. I'll select Auth as Auth1 again. All my keys are here. I'm gonna close or remove that one. And then now let's try to create an invoice for this customer 988. So let me hit send. Great. So you can see it was successful, and then in my invoice response, you can see that, I don't know if you're able to see, okay, yeah. That the customer ref was actually, it was able to resolve to the right value, and the invoice got created for the right customer with the right line item and everything else. So that is how you can use global variables, environment variables, and dynamic variables. So with that, I've covered, I think I've covered all of these. Next that I want to show you is code generation, which is also one of my favorite features of Postman. And to demonstrate that, I will do a get read by ID request for QuickBooks API. So if you're familiar, you know that in order to do a read by ID, all you have to do is specify the entity name and the ID of the entity that you want to read. And then I'm going to choose Auth1 here. And this is just a get request, so there's no body. And once I click send.
Hey, Diana, your sharing stopped.
Oh, my sharing stopped. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. Okay. So what I was showing you was how to read by ID, and what that would mean is our request. I'm just replacing the URL with the customer entity, and I'm reading the entity ID 1. And in the authorization, I just selected Oauth 1. And since this is a GET request, there's no body here. And once I hit send, you can see that customer ID 1, I was able to read customer ID 1. And then the next thing that you can do here is you'll find a button called code. And when you click on that, you will find that you're able to generate code in several different languages that Postman supports. So what this would mean is if you want to just use this in your code, you are able to make the API call. So if you want to just do like a curl sample, you can copy this, and then you may have to escape the JSON and the string a little bit. So I'm just going to use for free formatter tool to unescape the data here, and then probably put it into one line. So let me just format it a little bit. Okay. And then these are all fine. I think I don't need any of these. So I can just grab these. What I did, just to reiterate, did I stop sharing again? Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
I think I keep hitting the toolbar in the bottom, and that has I'll just move it. Okay. So what I did was I executed a get by ID. I went to code here, selected curl, and then copied this, just remove the escaped characters. And then I can open my terminal window and just use that curl command, and you can see that I was able to issue I was able to make the API call and get the response back using the curl command. So this is just for your if you want to just quickly try out the APIs, this is helpful, but it is also helpful if you need help debugging or writing code as well. So if you are interested in Java, you can go here and grab the code. The other day I had a developer who had trouble with the attachment API in Python. He was writing his code in Python, and I'm not very familiar in Python. So what I did was I generated a Python request using Postman, and I sent it over to him, and I asked him if he can compare his code with the one that I sent, and he was able to figure out just based on the code that I sent him, and figure out the issue and corrected his code. So it's useful if you're working with several different languages and you're not too familiar with it, or even if you want to learn a new language. So with that said, I will show you how I used the Postman code to develop a watch sample app. So the first thing that I did here was I downloaded Xcode and then created a simple watch app. And then it's not a very glamorous app. It's just a very simple app. I created a very simple storyboard here. It has one label and then 3 buttons here. And what this button is doing is when I click on customer, it will just do a get read by ID. And then similarly, I created actions for get employee by ID and get vendor by ID. And then I'm not really very familiar with Swift or Objective-C, so I thought let's give Postman a try. And since this is just for demo, I just wanted to see how easy or how hard it is to make a QuickBooks API call using watch apps. So what I did here was the same request, customer ID, get by ID. I went here, changed this to Objective-C, and then you can see that all these code got generated. So I just copied all of this code, and then if I go back to my Xcode, and then let me expand this a little bit so you can see it. And to fill this, okay. So I copied that, and then let me also expand it a little bit more. Okay. So in the get customer call, you can see that all the code that was generated here, I just directly copied and added it here, did a little cleanup. And then all it's doing is, adding the headers, the URL, making the actual API call. The only part that I changed here was how I'm processing the response. So once I get my response JSON back, I'm just getting the customer entity out of it, and then taking the display name out and setting it to the label. So similarly, I did that for employee and vendor as well. So let's run and see how it looks like. Again, all it is doing is it's fetching a customer and printing the name in this label here. So let me run the app, and here's a simulator. So let me start it. Okay. So this is how it's a basic UI. So when I click on customer, it will actually call the API, and you can see here, I don't know if you're able to see the console here, it actually made the API call, and then the label hello got replaced by the customer's name. And then similarly, if I hit on employee, it is fetching one of my employee names, and then it's printing the employee name here. Similarly for vendor, I think it's making it, it'll make a call to a vendor API, grab one of the vendors, and then display the name here. It's not a fancy app. It's just something to show that how you can take a completely random language that you've never worked before, and then you can use Postman to generate the code, and then just get a starter app ready. And it's not just a hello world app. It is an app that integrates with an API using OAuth headers and all of those. So and it really didn't take a lot of time. Just you just need to know a little bit basics. I was able to get this running easily. So so that is all I had in the demo side. The next thing that I wanted to show you was the different types of Postman collections that we offer in QuickBooks and how you can use them. So I'll go back to our developer portal here, and under API Docs and Tools, you can
hey, Diane?
Yes.
Before you jump in on that, there was a question that came in. I think Thomas came a little bit late, and so his question is really high level. If you could just like rewind for a second. He wanted to know, how do you even access Postman?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So if maybe before you show the libraries we have for Postman, like go back and just show.
Yeah, sure. So you can go to Postman's website called getpostman.com, and then click on download the app here. And it's a free app. You can choose the platform that you're in and download it. And once you download it, you can access, go to directly where it was downloaded, or search for it. And once you click on it, it'll open up this window without all these other tabs that I have opened here. It'll be like a new window like this. And then you can just start typing and get started with the API calls. And once you have a few API calls ready, you can also use the save button to save, or you can save as and put some name here, any meaningful name, and you can then organize them within collections. And then when you watch this video again, you'll be able to see, I don't know how much you missed, but you can see whether you can put the different authorization header, authorization data here, and other header and body here. Hope that clears the question.
Got it. Thank you, Diana.
Yep. So yeah, so I was showing what all how we use in Intuit Postman, and what all Postman samples we have available for our developers to use. So if you go to Docs and Tools under QuickBooks Online, you'll find this link called Postman, and sometimes Chrome doesn't populate this the very first time. So if you don't see anything here, just refresh the page once, and you'll see we have 3 collections here. This is QuickBooks Online collection for our accounting APIs in OAuth 2, and the next one is the same collection in OAuth 1. The only difference here is, and I have both of them downloaded, so I can show you quickly what the difference here is. For the OAuth 1, as you download it, it will be a collection of all the entities that we have currently, and all the operations that each of the entity supports. So you'll have like almost 182 API samples here in that collection. So if you want to like just do a read account or something, you can open one of these. And in the OAuth 1 collection, you already have all of these URLs already set along with the variable names here. And we also have like a sample environment already created. So all you needed to do is go here, edit, and add the actual value of your tokens. And you're all set actually. So once you download, you just modify the environment variable to put the actual values, and then you are able to run, get started and running your the API calls. For the Oauth 2 collection, it's again pretty much the same collection, except that instead of Oauth 1, we have the Oauth 2 authorization headers configured. So you will find a button like this instead of Oauth 1 data in here. And you do need to set up all the other URLs here, because these are specific to your environment and your client ID secret. So once you download the Oauth 2 collection, make sure to go here, populate all of this, and you don't have to do it for all the requests. Once you do it for one request, you can reuse it for the other request. And then rest of all of these values are also already populated for you, and you can get going. The next thing that we have here is a orchestrated collection. So what this means, and what this collection is it helps you, or it shows you how to create certain most common use cases in accounting, and what all entities that you need. For example, one of the very common use case is people want to know how to create an invoice. And in order to create an invoice, the first 2-3 things that you need is create a customer first, and then create an item, and then use the customer and the item to build the invoice. So using the orchestrated collection, we have samples to do all three together. So let me actually open one of that and show you how to do that. So I think this is the orchestrated collection that we have, and I have a sample here to create invoice. So as you can see here, in order to create an invoice, you need to create a customer first, and then item, and then invoice, right? So how do you run all of these three together? Within Postman, there is this button called Runner, where you can run collections. So when I click on this, it opens the Runner tab, and then in here, it lists all of my collections. So I'm gonna choose the orchestrated collection here, and within that, I'll choose the create invoice use case. And then I'm gonna select my environment here. So I'm gonna select my Sandbox. And once I do that, I can run that specific orchestrated collection. You can see here, all three use cases got created: create customer, create item, and invoice. So all three, so basically you kind of know, like, in order to create an invoice, what all the different requests that you need to deal with. So similar to that, we have other collections here, how to create an expense, time activity, and other common use cases. So if you're interested in learning all of those, you can download this collection. And then similarly, we also have a Postman collection for all of our payments API. So if you are interested in payments, you can go and download that collection as well. And then finally, once you build your collections, if you can always go here and share the collection. And there are also other features to add documentation to your collections. You can like go here and add what your request does. So anybody who you're sharing the collection with kind of knows what the request is actually doing. So with that said, I think that's all I had. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask now.
Yeah, Dan, I have a quick question about your talking about the sharing of collections. So is that is there like a repository for those, or is it just like I send it via an email and it's a link to the collection? Like, how does that work?
So in order to share it, you need to be logged in, and you can log in using your Gmail account as well. You don't have to create like a Postman account. So since I'm logged in into this instance, I can show you what that looks like. So you can just click here and share collection, and it gives you option to generate like a dynamic link. So you can see here, this is a dynamic link, and I can copy this and give it to you, and you can directly use this link. So I have another instance here, so you can use it to import using link. And so it is a dynamic link, right? And it's on the web. It's not like local to my machine or something. So I can use that, then import that collection here. So see, once I clicked import it, it downloaded that orchestrated collection from my other Postman instance into this one. And you can also, there's several ways to export also. So you can also export the collection as a JSON. So if you prefer, like, not using a link, you can also export it, the collection, and it will generate like a JSON file, and you can share that as well if you prefer that. Yeah, so that was about sharing. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions come in specific to Postman. We have a separate question related to a point of sale that I can kind of address separately outside of this when we stop recording. But yeah, just kind of our last call. If anybody has any more questions about Postman before I hit stop on the recording, please get those out there now. Let me just check the Q&A panel one more time and flip back over. Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions come in, Diana. So I think we can possibly wrap this up. Let me just share my desktop one more time here. Try this again. Get back in the Hangout. There we go, share screen. Cool. So, Diana, thank you for joining us today. I know somebody already put in the comments along the way that, like, hey, they're trying to build their very first app ever, and I think this is going to be really useful to them. So there's definitely those advantages of this is helping you build that code faster and kind of getting up to speed before you actually build your app out finally. So I think it's very helpful. Hopefully people will watch it a lot on YouTube, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana. Bye, everybody.